Pacers have a timeout. Will they use it? 4 seconds to go. Halliburton for three.
Overrated. Look, I get it. This word is so played out and overdone in conversations about Tyrese Halliburton, the Indiana Pacers, and NBA discourse in general right now. But before I can recount this thrilling ride that was the 2025 Indiana Pacers, before we can take a moment to truly look back on the purest form of basketball that we all just witnessed, I think there is no better way to start this story than by dissecting that very word. Overrated is a relative term. To be overrated, there has to exist ratings, a consensus, a general opinion, and overall some evidence. Before this year's playoffs, the Pacers were seen as meh. Slightly overrated due to their run the year prior being factored into conversations about them, and most people believing it was merely a fluke. Something that would never happen again. A team this mid on paper would never be expected to make a conference finals, let alone back-to-back, especially when their poster child is amidst a downward spiral statistically. You see, that stupid engagement bait of naming Tyrese Halliburton the most overrated player in the league via the APP, although only 13 players actually voted in it, the result had some solid backing to it. The year prior, Tyrese Halliburton took the NBA world by storm. His numbers skyrocketed, his playmaking took a noticeable leap, he led the Pacers to an incredible run early in the in-season tournament, lost to the Lakers in the championship, and proceeded to get hurt later on in the season shortly after, but when he returned, so did his production, and he orchestrated the Indiana Pacers taking an incredible trip to the Eastern Conference Finals off the back of stellar play, some stellar shooting, and some stellar injury luck. But fast forward only a few months, and Tyrese Halliburton had become a shell of his former self the year prior. As the All-Star break rolled around this year, he had lost his status as an All-Star, whilst his teammate Pascal Siakam would represent the Pacers as their sole star during the weekend. By only January, however, it seemed like the Pacers' hopes of ever making it back to the Eastern Conference Finals with this core were dead in the water. The Pacers currently sat at a measly 16-18, a far cry from their winning record and plus 55-point differential just 1 year prior, which, by the way, was before the team got their hands on Pascal Siakam. At this point in time, the media took notice. One of the most successful and hyped young stars in the league, he wasn't even an all-star, and it was for good reason. At that point, he was perceived as one of the league's premier guards, but with the numbers he had and his team no longer winning games, it was easy to point at him and say he was overrated. So when tasked with answering who you think the most overrated player in the league is at the end of the season, if you're an NBA player, you look back on not who the most overrated is all time in the league currently, but rather who's someone who took a dip from last year. Someone that's perceived as much better than their production gets, and someone who was supposed to take a leap after what they showed in the postseason. The answer to that question this season, it was Tyrese Halliburton, and it wasn't out of a grudge, nor would that answer change had more than only 13 players answered. It was simply just the most logical answer. However, what those fateful 13 failed to consider was the masterpiece of a back half of the season that was quietly brewing in Indiana. You see, following the All-Star snub, Tyrese's averages and shooting percentages would explode in tandem. After the All-Star break, he was averaging 20.6 points per game, 11 rebounds per game, 1.8 steals per game on 50-40-90 shooting splits. They finished the season out winning 20 of their last 29 games, boasting a 34-14 record since the dawn of the new year and propelling themselves to the 4th seed in a top-heavy Eastern Conference. This monumental turnaround was a celebration for the city of Indiana, but as their fans knew, celebrations came few and far between, and it seemed that the trend would continue for this year as Indiana was paired to face off against the Milwaukee Bucks in round 1. Led by Giannis Antetokounmpo, who was having a typical MVP caliber season and was finally not injured for a playoff run. Ladies and gentlemen, our story begins with these very games. Following the bounce back of the Pacers, and despite not having Dame to kick off the series, the Bucks were favored to win in 6, with title odds that were 39 points ahead of our Pacers. It would be no small feat taking down this team that was finally poised for another deep playoff run. Yeah, that didn't seem to faze these Pacers at all, as in their first 2 home games, they tuned out the noise and went to work.
You think about it, roll up to think about it. One more cup, know you let it drink about it. Roll up to
It was immediately apparent from the first two games of this series what made this team work was their teamwork and chemistry, as they had great games all around the board in game 1, with Tyrese finding Ben Mathurin and Pascal Siakam at every outlet, followed by similar dominance in game 2 with Tyrese Halliburton's 21 points and 12 assists. Giannis had two great games to begin the series, but it was clear he was lacking a second option, as he had in many playoffs before. His team was too slow to keep up. They were undisciplined on the Pacers' plethora of back cuts and cross-court sets, and they were in over their heads and overwhelmed, heading back to Milwaukee in a 2-0 hole. It was essentially a redo of what we had seen from other Giannis playoff runs. He needs a Robin, he needs scoring from elsewhere, and they sacrificed defense to get that scoring, and Dame just wasn't there. In game 3, although Dame had returned to lackluster production and finished with only 7 points, Giannis would take matters into his own hands, dropping an unreal 37, 12, and 6 stat line and propelling the Bucks to a 16-point massive win at home. You might be wondering what changed between this game and the last two. Giannis was already playing good, so why were they just now winning games? Well, that's thanks to Gary Trent Jr.'s 37-point performance. Unreal. Good for the Pacers, however, because they couldn't bank on the Bucks having this level of production from Gary Trent Jr. on any given night. And so in a pivotal game 4, Dame would check out in just 6 minutes, Gary Trent would drop just 6 points, and Giannis would waste yet another great performance as they fall 3-1 to the Pacers, who had seemingly no chance of winning before the series began. However, in that closeout game 5 in Indiana, things were finally looking up for Milwaukee. They dominated in the first quarter, up 30-13, and aiming to send things back to Milwaukee for a game 7. But the Pacers would bring it down to 6 at half, and by the start of the fourth quarter, a huge third quarter from Andrew Nembhard would have the game all tied up with 1 period to go. This was nightmare fuel for Bucks fans. The Bucks and Pacers traded blows in an electric fourth quarter, but the Bucks seemed to have the upper hand, as it was yet another instance of Giannis going nuclear alongside a nuclear performance from Gary Trent, propelling the Bucks to a winning game. Green would hit a huge shot to put the Bucks ahead 4 with only a minute to go, and from there, Halliburton and Giannis would go shot for shot, with Halliburton equalizing on a go-ahead dunk, and Giannis being given the keys to take hold of the series with a game winner. This was his superstar moment. This was it for the Greek Freak.
Draco send out the car, let go.
He missed it, and the Bucks were going to have to somehow fight through in overtime with a team this hot. However, luckily for them, Gary Trent Jr. hadn't cooled off a bit. I remember watching this game live and thinking, surely Gary Trent isn't hitting back-to-back threes in the clutch in overtime, and I was right, because he hit back-to-back clutch threes instead. The Pacers closed down on the lead, however, and brought it within 1 with a minute to go. However, yet again, when they needed him most, Gary Trent Jr. was still there.
112-111. My goodness, you gotta get to him! Get to him!
Giannis would put the icing on the cake with a lay to go up 7 with under 40 seconds to go. Indiana fans were already filing out of the stadium. In this moment, Milwaukee sat at a 99.5% chance to win the game. It was over. But then Andrew Nembhard hit a 3. That's cool, but it's still way too little too late. He stole the ball, got it to Halliburton, and
Halliburton has it. 20 seconds to play. They don't mind him getting a layup. And he'll lay it in and a foul.
Hold on. Okay, but still, the Bucks just needed to hold on to the ball and lead. And so they gave the ball to their night savior in Gary Trent Jr., and he dropped it? With only 10 seconds left, it was now Halliburton versus Giannis for the fate of the series. Tyrese Halliburton had just risen to the occasion and took his Pacers on to the next round, putting the world on notice. It was a huge win. And the good thing about winning in 5 is that they would have one of the most well-rested rosters returning for the second round in the East. Unfortunately for them, however, their opponent would be even more well-rested. They earned themselves a lucky date with the Cleveland Cavaliers, who outclassed them in rest, record, all-stars, seeding, win rate, rating, depoys, and just about every metric. The entire NBA world knew that a Celtics versus Cavs Eastern Conference Finals was on the horizon, and now it was time for the Pacers to be next on the chopping block. They had a fun run while it lasted. Luckily for them, they would catch a little bit of a break. The Cavs would be without one of their many all-stars and offensive threats in Darius Garland, and so if they could just pull off one win before returning to Indiana, they could potentially have a chance against the juggernaut. Indiana came out with a passion in game 1 and showed no signs of slowing down. They got out to an early lead and coasted the entire game as they do, taking advantage of the Cavs missing Darius Garland to a T. Despite late efforts from Mobley and Mitchell, Nembhard and Halley shut the door and stole yet another road game 1 in back-to-back series. Game 2 was another huge win for the Pacers as they aimed to pile on one more win before Garland's great return, but unfortunately for them, Donovan Mitchell was having none of it. By the second quarter of game 2, the Cavs were up 32-15 and Donovan Mitchell was dominating all game long. He had 48 points with 48 seconds left in the game, and although the Cavs led by 7 with that little left to play, even the announcers knew that nothing was quite over just yet with Indiana.
What Indiana did in that clincher against Milwaukee, look at that stick back, Naismith.
The Pacers got back down the floor and Siakam's dominance continued, followed by Tyrese driving to the rack and getting fouled yet again as he had in game 5 versus the Bucks. He made the first free throw, but the Pacers were down 2 with 12 seconds left and he only had 1 shot left. So magic would be required for them to somehow get their own rebound and try and tie the game with a layup over this huge, towering Cavs roster. They'd done it just a few plays prior, but the Cavs were ready and prepared now with their 7-footers to end this one. This was it for the Pacers.
Second one is short, and it's rebounded by Halliburton. Pacers have a timeout. Will they use it? 4 seconds to go. Halliburton.
Lord, if they only do them nights, dirt, burn candles by the dozen tonight. So fire, sheer energy release, melt the heart, mind, star voice, love, want to wax, you get back.
This shot, this celebration, this moment is when the world took off their glasses, rubbed their eyes, and took a deeper look at the Indiana Pacers and Tyrese Halliburton. A team that was written off months ago, written off weeks ago, written off days ago, hours ago, hell, even seconds ago, just swept home court advantage and is returning to Indiana against the major #1 seed out east. And on top of that, this team had so much to love, just so much fun with a great quirky environment, from Miles Turner and his Legos to my personal favorite, Tyrese Halliburton's relationship with James Johnson.
We noticed that there's always one teammate waiting for you after the game.
James Johnson.
So why are you always waiting for Tyrese to be done with his interviews?
I always want to be the last. You ever seen a wolf pack before? The leader of the pack stay in the back.
We out here securing Halliburton, making sure we get back to that locker room.
We talk on our way in about what we're going to say when we get to the locker rooms, both leaders of this group in different ways.
I don't know, just something about seeing a young star leading with skill and an old role player leading with force. The hype around this team and Halliburton's magic moments began here. But it died just a few days later when they came back to Indiana and Darius Garland came back to basketball. Although Garland's minutes were limited and not very impactful alongside Donovan Mitchell, who continued to prove himself one of the best shooting guards on the planet, Tyrese Halliburton was now under the mass limelight and he shit the bed. The Cavs ran away with this one as they were expected to all series long, and it looked like it was finally shifting now that the Cavs were all healthy. Tyrese was clowned by the world, and the onlookers that began to take notice of the Pacers' run looked back down at their phones, tweeted some Pacers slander, and wrote them off once again. Heading into Game 4, coming off a crushing 22-point home loss, this would be the pivotal moment in the series. If the Pacers took a 3-1 lead, that was essentially the nail in the coffin. However, the Cavs heading back to Cleveland after winning 2 straight on the road, that was a death sentence for Indiana in and of itself. This was the deciding game. It was a massive game, and one team needed to make a statement. By halftime in Indianapolis, that statement was all but made in the form of a Pacers lead. A 41-point Pacers lead. In just 24 minutes of basketball, the Pacers had essentially told the world, believe it if you want to, but we're here, and we're still here. Maybe things could have been different for the Cavs if they had Garland from the jump, but he wasn't impacting them at all. And although there was an opportunity for a 3-1 comeback, a loss that crushing would make any team tap out. I remember watching the 4th quarter of this game live and realizing how helpless and frustrating this loss was for Cavs fans. All they could do was sit back and watch. With 5 minutes to go, Donovan Mitchell was hot, and they were only down by 1. There was no reason for the game to feel bleak for Cavs fans yet, but every possession the Pacers had seemed calculated, collected, collected and steady, whilst the Cavs were visibly anxious. They were blindly hounding every pass, getting lost in endless transition sets and sneaky back cuts, just in a snake-like coiling bind with no choice but to sit back and let their fate sink in. The Cavs could not buy a bucket, and wanting them to score was so nerve-wracking, knowing that they needed every single point to keep up with Indiana's level of production. Meanwhile, on the other side of the floor, the Pacers could not miss. They were so smooth and so effortless, and this was the moment that their DNA struck me. Hear me out. Every NBA team changes with the flow of the game, from rotations based on who's hot, to schemes based on who's working for the opponent, to how the offense is run depending on who's your best bet for operating from the half court. Every flow of a team's play. But these Pacers, the way they're constructed, they're the same team from tip-off to final whistle. Let me try and explain what I mean. The pace that they play out, the looks they generate, their ball movement, their defensive tenacity, all of it, while it can slightly shift in aggression based on momentum and situation, it is virtually the same standard of aggression for the entirety of the game. This team got so hot at the right time, not by chance, but because they lived the exact same formula all season long and grew with that formula. That chemistry, that pace, that flow, until it became second nature in a way that opposing teams couldn't game plan. That's why they won so much later in the season. You can't game plan hustle and chemistry. You can't game plan a player that has a higher playoff win rate than a turnover to assist ratio. You can't adapt and adjust around a team that is consistently operating at this level, this flow, this rhythm. They operate the exact same from minute 1 to the final minute, and that's why they are so deadly in a playoff environment. It's because they're so collected in clutch moments. Gary Trent Jr. fumbling this pass, that's not collected. That's anxious. The Cavs missing these game-saving opportunities due to poor shot selection and tunnel vision, that's not collected. That's anxious. Tyrese Halliburton hitting a historic amount of game winners, that is collected. That is clutch. This is the discovery that made the Pacers' supposed luck and clutch factor make sense in my mind. You will always play better when you're confident and comfortable, and both of those things are built through trust and repetition, the two factors that define this Pacers scheme from Rick Carlisle. They call it the power of friendship, and they couldn't be more right. I've never seen a team with this much pure intuition and trust in each other, and this is what I believe to be the proof of genius of Rick Carlisle. He's done this before with less talented teams, and this intangible rhythm that the Pacers have, they've completely mastered it. This is why they're so successful. This is why they beat teams with way more expensive and higher end rosters. Sorry, I got carried away. I just had to put that there. Alright, where are we? Oh yeah.
Rappers, I'm up, you flip 'em with the broken rhythm, I be kicking. Musician, inflicting composition of pain. I'm like Scarface, sniffing cocaine, holding the M16. See with the pen, I'm extreme. Now
it's game 1 of the 2025 Eastern Conference Finals, and Madison Square Garden is on their feet. This crowd has just witnessed one of the most entertaining playoff games of the year thus far, and as it wound down, their darling Knicks were up 14 with 2:51 left in the game. It was the perfect night to be a New Yorker. They would go up 1-0 at home and get to tear apart the streets in jubilation after a short 2-minute span of garbage time buckets, except Aaron Nesmith had other plans. For some reason, Aaron Nesmith and Tyrese Halliburton caught nuclear in this fourth quarter. They just couldn't miss, and the Pacers began to put on the pressure. That Pacers snake analogy, it began to coil again. Mistakes became more and more frequent for the Knicks, and then trailing by 2, Rick Carlisle saw that he had the hottest three-point shooter on the planet in that moment, in the stretch of spans of any game, in Aaron Nesmith, who just hit back-to-back-to-back threes, and he took the basketball and he handed it to Tyrese Halliburton. That is not a bold decision, a risky decision. That is trust.
Seconds to go. Halliburton driving. He's in the lane. He nearly lost it. He backs up and unloads a three. Oh! That did not happen. It hit the back of the rim. It popped high into the air. And it dropped gently through the net.
Yes, the choke was premature, but the massive swing in momentum and coiling of the snake the Pacers had, making the Knicks more and more prone to defensive breakdowns and mistakes, had pretty much sealed the deal in this game. No one was really playing defense in overtime, but the Pacers' onslaught was simply greater than the Knicks. The final play came about, and with the Knicks down by 3, it was their turn for a legendary game-tying shot. And who better to take it than the reigning clutch player of the year, Jalen Brunson.
Here's Brunson, picked up by Nembhard, down by 3. Here is a 3 for the tie, short, caught by Hart, out to Towns, to tie, no! Rebound, fought for, loose, Bridges has got it!
Look, you want to know why Tyrese Halliburton has no trouble hitting an impossible game-tying shot like this in one of the most hostile away playoff environments you could possibly be a part of, whilst the clutch player of the year can't hit this game-tying shot with less pressure, more time at home in the same exact game? It's because one of these guys is trusted wholeheartedly, experienced, and comfortable in these situations, and the other doesn't have the luxury of such development. This game was the clearest display of what the 2025 Indiana Pacers had that every other team in the NBA didn't. In case you were wondering, here's what the win probability looked like for that game. Absolutely unbelievable yet again. Before game 2 even began, we all knew that this all-time hyped up series would deliver on that promise of all-time basketball. The first quarter of game 2 immediately picked up the hype real quickly, and Pascal Siakam was terrorizing the Knicks, and they were taking it in stride. The Knicks were up by 3 at half and continued going swing for swing up until the fourth quarter, where they were all tied up with the Pacers at 81. This was another all-time classic game. Although they'd been trading blows all game, all series, once the Pacers take a lead late in a game, that snake begins to coil. Their rhythm never dissipates, and the hopelessness begins to set in. There is nothing you can do to take a Pacers team with a lead in the playoffs out of their groove in 2025. New York desperately needed to win this. They'd seen how other teams dropped both games at home and could never recover against this team, and knew how crucial avoiding that hole would be. But unbeknownst to the Knicks, the Pacers, they'd already won.
On the wing, it's a three, got it! 3.8 seconds to shoot. Nesmith, three, got it! Uh-oh.
At this point, I don't need to explain to you what happens from here. The Pacers' venom had already laid its course. They were up 2-0 after winning 2 road games, and even though they would always drop the game 3, Tyrese Halliburton would come out and smash it in game 4, giving us another historic performance and taking the Pacers to a game 5 up 3-1 yet again on a team they weren't supposed to beat. And despite another legendary playoff performance in the closeout game of the series and hitting the game winner in game 1 of this series, the only all-star on their team in Pascal Siakam was the one who was rewarded with the Eastern Conference Finals MVP, and it was for good reason, because I forgot to mention one key detail about Tyrese Halliburton. For the entirety of this playoff run, he showed why that overrated card still lingered overhead, as he is unable to string together 3 or even 2 great performances back to back. And that was something that the Pacers could not afford heading into this finals against a juggernaut, a team they had no business standing against on a basketball court. The team I'm talking about is, of course, the Oklahoma City Thunder, as the Thunder opened up this series as -700 favorites. That can't be right. Why was it that a team with more playoff experience and chemistry were such massive underdogs? And well, that's because the OKC Thunder were just that good. You see, the Pacers had benefited thus far by playing against slow, star-driven, top-heavy teams. These are teams that had limited options from the bench and heavy ball-dominated star reliance for offensive production. And once games had whittled down, so did the production of those stars who got tired, whilst the Pacers could run a mile and back, still swing the ball, still make savvy passes and cuts to generate buckets late in games. There wasn't a single team in these playoffs thus far that had proved they could operate at a level anywhere close to this. Whoa. Any team except the one operating at a level above it, the Oklahoma City Thunder. If this graphic right here isn't enough to convey how much of an underdog the Pacers were, how about the fact that every analyst, every media outlet, every fan had the Pacers counted out from before the series even began? The world was already preparing to hand SGA his triple crown and talk about the terrible ratings of a series that hasn't even happened yet and reign in the NBA's newest dynasty. But if there was any team to defy underdog status, how about the most overrated team in the league, currently outlasting all the others? Despite how you thought this series would unfold, by halftime it was clear that the concerns were valid. The Pacers seemed already out of the series, as everyone had presumed, skittish with the pressure of such an immense stage and hounding OKC crowd and defense, whilst the Thunder seemed to have carried momentum from their dominant series versus the Timberwolves.
Williams, SGA puts up a 3, puts it in.
This carried all the way into the fourth quarter, where SGA was dominating. The Thunder were up by 8. Only 2:52 was left on the clock, and the Thunder had a whopping 97.4% chance to win game 1. This all makes it seem like this game was completely over, but after 20 straight minutes of watching these Pacers, you should know that no game against them is ever out of reach. Nesmith hit a 3 to chop the lead, and shortly after, Nembhard put the Pacers in striking distance with one of the coldest isolations I have ever seen. Oh my goodness.
Reese is not even the main ball handler at this point in time because the defense has been so aggressive.
Nembhard steps back, 3-pointer. Got it! 3-pointer from Nembhard.
The Pacers continued, fighting for their first lead of the game in the fourth quarter via clutch plays from Siakam, but Siakam would fall just out of bounds on a controversial play, giving the Thunder the keys with a 1-point lead and just enough time to extend it. Both teams had timeouts left, but with all the back and forth, chippiness, and momentum swings, you could tell from the second this ball was inbounded that they were both fed up and this game would be decided here and now.
Final seconds, no fouls to give. Halliburton looking. Halliburton driving. Pulls off, jump shot. It's good! With 0.3 of a second remaining. Tyrese Halliburton does it again.
This was the shot that made everyone who said this series would be a boring blowout eat their words immediately. Tyrese Halliburton had somehow just completed the most impossible string of game winners on the most electric underdog run of all time, hitting a game winner in every single round of the playoffs, alongside some of the most improbable comebacks point and time-wise ever. Yes, they might be in over their heads thinking they can beat OKC in this series, but by stealing home court in Game 1 yet again, this was their trophy to win. Game 2, however, would bring them back down to earth. The OKC team that was notorious for adjustments, well, they would adjust, and not a single Pacer would score 20 whilst J-Dub and Shea combined for 53. They dominated the entire game, and heading to Indiana for Game 3, the doubters were eager to say they were right, to question the validity of these Pacers as they fall 2-1 in a Game 3. Yet with a Game 3 statement left to make in order to keep the dream alive, the Pacers got to work. Game 3 of the 2025 NBA Finals was a love letter to the sport of basketball and hate mail to the casual fans. It was a nail-biter from start to finish where right when the Pacers hit a groove, the Thunder would match it, and right when the Thunder began to pull away, in came the Pacers' savior who's been giving them everything they needed right when they need it. I'm not talking about Hallie, I'm not talking about Siakam, I'm talking about TJ McConnell. To see what I mean, let me direct you to this chart. With about 9 minutes left to play, the Thunder had around 75% chance to win, up by 4, but after pure grit from McConnell
on the steal and he bats it home. He's done it again.
He had single-handedly sliced the percentage by a third in one play. The game would continue as a back and forth down to the dying embers, but this time when Indiana began to pull away and OKC was right out to punch back, Miles Turner would shut the faucet off.
Holmgren fakes. Kicks it out. Jalen Williams off the bounce. Back to Holmgren. Holmgren three-pointer blocked by Turner. Holmgren gets it back with 4 to shoot. Holmgren down the lane. The runner. It's going the other way. Holmgren thought he was fouled.
Against all odds. That's the motto for these Pacers, and against them yet again, the Pacers would be at home in an all-yellow crowd for Game 4 in hopes of taking their fourth 3-1 lead against teams that they weren't supposed to even be able to touch, this time on the biggest stage of basketball in the NBA Finals. As a neutral fan, watching this, biting my nails every game, even this felt too good to be true, and something about Game 4 had us all on the edge of our seats to see what would become of this series in such a crucial matchup.
Halliburton drives all the way to the rim. Layup is good.
It turned out that Game 4 wasn't too good to be true. With the game winding down, the Pacers had been dominating all night, and although their huge lead was already down to 4, it was clear that they had all the momentum in the world and the home crowd on their side to close this one out, as they had plenty of times before this playoff. This team was known for winning clutch games, and now they were in a situation where they had even more of an upper hand, winning by 4 with a 75% chance to take a 3-1 lead instead of having to come from behind improbably. This meant everything to the city of Indianapolis. Giannis wasn't enough to stop the 3-1 lead. Donovan Mitchell couldn't put up a fight against it. Jalen Brunson would eventually succumb to, and now it was SGA's turn. Shea had shown all playoffs long that he wasn't built for hero ball when his team desperately needed him, and all of a sudden, the Pacers snake was coiling in on its final victim. It was time for the false MVP to show his true colors under the limelight. Except, those colors, they might have been true after all.
Off the grid. I'm off the grid. Got tats on my ribs, tattoos on my wrists. I just tatted my kids. I just do 20 county. We was in
It It was a tough pill to swallow, watching the Pacers get a taste of their own medicine at the hands of SGA, who showed the world why he was deserving of the once-in-a-generation guard conversations that he was thrust into. All of a sudden, a surefire 3-1 lead in favor of Indiana had turned into a tied series going back to OKC, where the Thunder had home court and momentum to take a decisive 3-2 lead. The Thunder were out of rhythm for the first half of the series, but SGA pulling them through to a lead-taking game at home might be the juice needed to get the guys like Jalen Williams fired up. And unfortunately for the Pacers, that's exactly what happened.
Yeah, when I walked into it, I honestly was just trying to sorry, I'm tired, to be honest.
Yeah, you worked hard, man. You should be tired.
Just like that, a potential 3-1 lead for Indiana had flipped into a 3-2 hole in favor of OKC after Jalen Williams put on the game of a lifetime. And now, after shooting 0 for 6 in Game 5, the ball was in the court of Tyrese Haliburton for a win-or-die Game 6. He had strained his calf in Game 5, but was ready to accept the injury risk and trudge on when his team needed him most. He had to be there. The lifelong dreams of him and his teammates rested on his availability, and to him, that was of utmost importance, not recovery. Game 6 was everything for Indiana, and in front of this home crowd that had been with them from the rocky beginning to the glorious run, the Pacers would deliver. Tyrese Haliburton would have an ultra-efficient 23 minutes on a bad leg, allowing himself and his teammates the rest that they needed after doing the unthinkable. They'd recovered and won, forcing a Game 7 in which it was all or nothing. On Sunday, June 22nd, it would be the ultimate favorite going toe-to-toe with the ultimate underdog. It had been a long, grueling season of action-packed, fast-paced closeouts and basketball and constant hounding on defense for both of these teams for months upon months. But eventually, all of their combined efforts had mounted to this, a cultivation of just 48 minutes to make dreams come true for yourself and a city that was barren of championships on both sides. It was that, or you get sent home with nothing but the tear-stained jerseys on your back. The game began, and immediately, despite the injury in Game 5 and limited minutes due to recovery that we saw from him in Game 6, Tyrese Haliburton was on full display. This was Game 7, win or go home, and with Tyrese willing to put everything on the line one final time, well, Rick Carlisle was done holding him back. We had never seen Tyrese Haliburton be this aggressive and dominant ever in his entire career. This was the biggest game you could possibly play in as an NBA player, and he wasn't there to make plays. He was there to be them.
Haliburton very aggressive, looking for his shot. Another three-point attempt. That one short. Williams tips it, but Factor right there to pick it up. Haliburton tries again. Haliburton hits again. His third three-pointer already.
Just to convey the severity of this performance that you're witnessing, let me point out that throughout his entire career, Hallie averages 1.7 3-points attempted in the first quarter and hits them at a rate of roughly 40%. In Game 7, however, with just 5 minutes off the clock, Hallie had already attempted 4 threes and hit 75% of them. On top of that, Shea was playing just as well on the other end. Everyone in this crowd and watching from home knew that we were all in for an all-time classic game and an all-time classic performance from none other than Tyrese Haliburton.
Good contest from Dort. Haliburton falls down. He looks hurt. Here comes SGA the other way. Inside, and Williams throws it down. Halliburton's hurt.
This moment, regardless of if you were a Pacers fan, neutral fan, or even a die-hard Thunder fan, sent shockwaves through you and the basketball world. We all sat in disbelief watching one of the biggest what-ifs in NBA history unfold before our eyes, and what hurt most was the realization of what we had lost. We were about to get one of the most legendary Tyrese Halliburton performances and championship games in the history of sport, but instead we were left watching the most likable star in the league pound the floor in gut-wrenching pain as the dreams of an entire city evaporated in an instant. What hurt the most for me was the look on his teammates' faces as they realized all the luck, all the flash, all the fortune, it had finally caught up to them in the most poetic way imaginable. And to add on to such a gruesome, poetic end was the fact that James Johnson, the man who was side by side with Tyrese waiting to walk out with him after every single game since his first ever game in Indiana, he was the one who escorted him out one final time. Despite all ounces of hope being drained in an instant, after Tyrese's departure, reality began to set in for the rest of the Pacers as it was still the first quarter and Indiana had to go back out there with or without him to try and pull off the upset of the century. It was a daunting task, but if there was any team to overcome the odds yet again, it was this one. The Pacers weren't done yet, continuing to fight tooth and nail with their new helm of TJ McConnell running the show, and they proved that regardless of Halliburton's injury, they weren't going down without guns a-blazing. Heading into halftime, they managed to go strike for strike with the Thunder and head to the locker room up by a single point, 48-47. To this point, the Pacers were hanging on by hitting their threes while OKC missed theirs, but from this point on, OKC's shot began to fall and pressure began to mount. The Pacers' offense had fallen stagnant late in the third quarter, and as desperation began to set in, all that Indiana had to rely on was one man: TJ McConnell. There are moments in sports when someone knows they're fighting a losing battle, yet they fight to the bitter end and salvage any bit of dignity they have left. And every time, without fail, these are some of the most beautiful moments that you can witness live. Something about a guy like TJ McConnell with no bag, no size, and no stardom being the representative of all underdogs for the most underdog team, taking on the biggest stage of basketball and dominating, scoring 12 straight points and being the only person to score for this team for over a quarter lengths of time. That's a moment that fans will never forget. In the fourth quarter, the lead became insurmountable, yet TJ's will had infected Ben Mathurin, and slowly the other Pacers came around. Nembhard hit a deep three as he'd done so many times to get them here. Siakam got one more chase down block as an ode to his efforts this season. And the team sent a hounding double team to every inbound and every pass until the very end. The impossible run had finally come to an end. The Pacers lost, but man, if anything, did they go down like Pacers. I began writing this video during the Eastern Conference Finals after this shot against the Knicks, and with every win, the Pacers proved even me wrong little by little as I had to continually pile onto this video, making it the juggernaut of a video that it is today. I wanted so badly to end this story by crowning the champion Pacers and showing clips of their parade, but instead, this video's tone is entirely different, all because of one moment. Maybe if Tyrese never got injured, we would be laughing at a drunken speech from TJ McConnell as it made its rounds on the internet, or having conversation of where Halliburton ranks all time time after bringing the city of Indiana a championship. But instead, it hurts so bad to be left with nothing but a what-if scenario, and memories of a team that stole our hearts, stole the show, and nearly stole a ring. What-ifs are always the hardest pill to swallow in sports because now the legacy of Tyrese and this Pacers team will never truly be defined. Hypothetically, if the Pacers held on to their lead in Game 4 and maybe had some extra calls go their way, they would have been crowned champions at home after winning Game 6. That's what hurts for the fans, the fact that an improbable championship run poetically ended with the most improbable outcome in which the Pacers never went up 3-1, never won a ring in Game 6, and Tyrese Haliburton tore his Achilles in a Game 7 that was never supposed to happen. Who knows what will be said about these 2025 Pacers 10 to 15 years from now? Will the people then remember Tyrese's insane shots and comebacks? How about Andrew Nembhard and Aaron Neesmith's late-game heroics time and time again? Or even TJ McConnell's 12 straight points in Game 7 of the NBA Finals? Only time will tell how history will treat and cherish the moment in NBA history that was this Pacers run. Hell, for all we know, they could end up calling it all luck, a fluke, or even overrated.